Marinaro, the Sick Podcast, one Montreal Canadian received a very prestigious award last night. Pretty impressive considering his age. Two Montreal Canadiens prospects are doing their thing at the World Juniors. Looks pretty positive. One of them said he played against the other guy, and there's no doubt in his mind who he would have taken. And one NHL executive off the record tells a colleague that the previous Montreal Canadiens general manager left a mess behind. And with one goalie hurt, another goalie might be a trade target. The big question is, should the Canadiens trade him or not, knowing that they too have a question mark when it comes to the health status of one of their goalies. I will tackle all this and more. I'm going on with my favorite guest in the world, Tony Marinaro. He goes solo. That's me. Hey, Mosey too. It's the Sick Podcast. Coming up.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to the Sick Podcast. With Tony Marinaro. The sickest Montreal Canadiens podcast.
And now a 24th Stanley Cup banner will hang from the rafters of the famous Forum in Montreal. The Canadiens win the Stanley Cup.
Sports entertainment like no other. Brought to you by 8.6 Beer, intense by nature. And La Cage. If the last time you went to La Cage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you went back to La Cage. The menu will surprise you.
Marinaro, the Sick Podcast, brought to you by 8.6 Beer, intense by nature, the beer for those who follow their instinct and live their mark in order to and live their passions in order to make their mark, that is. And La Cage, if the last time you went to La Cage was when it was called La Cage au Sport, it's time that you go back to La Cage because the menu will definitely surprise you. There's a lot of topics I want to tackle today, and what you would think would be a slow August day, but it's not, because the World Junior Championships are going on. But before we get to that, there was a sporting ceremony in Slovakia, and they named the Slovakian Hockey Player of the Year, and it went to Juraj Slafkovsky, who was the leading scorer at the Winter Olympics, was absolutely fantastic. I believe he was the 11th leading point getter at the World Championships. He had himself a great year. So he wins the Slovakian Hockey Player of the Year award. What's cool is that at 18 years of age, he is the youngest ever to do so. So, I mean, if when the Canadiens chose him first overall, you said, I don't know about this, a Slovakian going first overall. I mean, they've had some good players, and they had Marian Gaborik and they had Marian Hossa, but first overall, I don't know. Well, this doesn't mean that it's going to legitimize the pick. That's the word I was looking for. But at the same time, you have to be very encouraged knowing that he's the youngest Slovakian ever to win the award. That tells you that this guy's cut from a different cloth. He's a different breed. He's in a special category. So I thought that was really cool. And another, thing we could talk about is a couple of Montreal Canadiens prospects. Joshua Roy has turned out to be an amazing find. The Canadiens drafted him 150th overall in the 2021 draft, 150th. And Joshua Roy is coming off a great season with Le Phoenix de Sherbrooke, in which he scored 51 goals, 68 assists, and 119 points in the regular season. And in the playoffs, he had 23 points in 11 games. Well, Joshua Roy made the Canadian World Junior team, where he didn't make it back in the month of December when it was supposed to take place, but obviously it was postponed because of COVID. And, he picked up a goal and 3 assists in an 11-1 win over Slovakia, who doesn't have, their 3 best players there, but nevertheless, a goal and 3 assists versus Slovakia. And then there's Jan Mysak, who was drafted, a Czech centerman who was drafted 48th overall in the 2020 draft. He played a couple of games for the Laval Rocket, but last year played for the Hamilton Bulldogs of the Ontario Hockey League. Mysak, a couple of games in, has 3 goals and 1 assist. He's looking really, really good. He also scored the lone goal for the Czechs in a shootout for his team in a 4-3 shootout loss versus Finland. But reporters had a chance to catch up with Mishak after the game. And this was a couple of days ago. And by the way, I think he had something like 13 shots in his first tournament game or whatever it was. It was unbelievable. Anyway, he's looked really, really good a couple of games in. And they caught up with him. And they actually asked him if he thinks the Canadiens made the right pick. Let's watch.
What did you think of the team drafting Slafkovsky instead of Wright? Did you have an opinion on that back then?
For me, I see Yuri Slafkovsky as a really strong player. I played whole year against Shane Wright, so for me personally, if I'll be GM, I would take Slafkovsky too.
Wow. You know, young players, listen, hockey players usually don't say all that much on the record, right? They don't, you know, they're very conservative and very diplomatic with their answers. For Mishak to come out and say, hey, listen, you know, I played in the OHL and I played versus Shane Wright, and I would take Slafkovsky too. Now, it doesn't mean that he's right, but, you know, once again, there's been, the pick was not unanimous. And, you know, it probably won't be in a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, or maybe 10 years from now, they're going to say, you know what, Shane Wright's the one who had the better career. Anything's possible, and all that can happen. And, you know, it might lead people to say, oh, you know what, the Canadiens made a mistake. But here you have it. Mishak who's saying, look, I played against Shane Wright, and I take Slafkovsky. It sounds like it's his way of saying, you know what, I played against Shane Wright, and I wasn't blown away. There's something to think about, huh? There's something to think about. All right, okay. Now, speaking of talking on the record and off the record, that was Mishak on the record. And now we're going to get to something off the record. But before we do, I want to let you know that if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, please comment sick. If you're listening on audio, please leave a 5-star review and write the word sick, S-I-C-K. When you comment sick, S-I-C-K, that's our way of feeling the love, and we appreciate it. So now, off the record, Jimmy Murphy of Boston Hockey Now, Montreal Hockey Now, joined me earlier in the week right here on the Sick Podcast. And he says that he spoke with an NHL executive who tells him that he thinks Kent Hughes is doing a great job of cleaning up the mess left by the guy who left. So there's a shot at Marc Bergevin. It comes off the record, which I think sucks because anyone can say, you know what, off the record and stuff like that. If you really believe something, why don't you talk on the record? But, you know, people are scared of saying a lot of things. Luckily, I don't have that problem. But, you know, when we're talking NHL executive, an NHL executive can mean what exactly? It can mean a GM. It can be an assistant GM. It could be a director of amateur scouting. It could be a director of pro scouting. It could be, you know, the capologist. It could mean a lot of things. Now, some will say Marc Bergevin left the mess behind. You know, Gallagher's contract is not looking great right now. Carey Price's contract is not looking great. Petrie's contract before they traded him wasn't looking great. Josh Anderson, who knows if he's going to be able to play to that contract. Jonathan Drouin maybe didn't, or this or that, or how about Hoffman? All that stuff. I can understand someone saying that. But people need to realize a couple of things. It's not to come to Marc Bergevin's defense. It's really not. Because if you read earlier in the season, Eric Engels' piece in The Athletic after talking with Jeff Gordon, you'll realize that there were a lot of things that really just probably got away, and probably, you know, things weren't at the level they should have been at. But I will say this. Marc Bergevin wasn't given the green light to rebuild. He wasn't. When he sat down and they had that meeting and they had that interview, and the other GM candidates had the interview, that was back 10 years ago. He was hired initially, I think, May 2nd, 2012. So the interviews, let's just say they took place in April of 2012. Based on what I heard, a plan to rebuild was not on the table. They basically said, what are you going to do to turn this thing around? And the Canadiens wanted to turn it around as quickly as possible. So he has to go out and he can't be bad for 4 or 5 years. He has to try and get to the playoffs as fast as possible. And then once he gets to the playoffs, he has to try and win the Stanley Cup. So he tried to go for it and maybe cut a few corners here and there, maybe had to overpay every now and then, all that stuff. And he did so, and they got to the final. And then if he would have stayed on board, he would have had to continue to patch, because at that point he couldn't look at his owner and say, I think we should rebuild. The owner was not going to have any part of it after he had been there for 9.5 years. But once he's replaced and they bring in Jeff Gordon, put him in charge, and then Jeff Gordon brings in Kent Hughes and hires him as his general manager, and now you have this double-headed monster that is Gordon and Hughes. And I say that in a very, very nice way, by the way, because I like them both a lot, but that's just the term, of course. When Jeff Gordon had that meeting with Jeff Molson initially, Jeff Molson probably wanted to meet with him because he had probably decided that he wanted to go the way of a rebuild because he saw the work that Jeff Gordon had did with the New York Rangers. Or Jeff Gordon brought it up and said, look at the work that I did with the Rangers. I mean, I looked at the Rangers and I saw too many teams in front of us and didn't think that if we patched that we would be able to be better than those teams. And I didn't think we had a real good chance of winning the Stanley Cup. I thought we had a much better chance if we're going to rebuild, and that's exactly what I think has to happen here in Montreal. So did Marc Bergevin leave a little bit of a mess behind? It's a mess if you want to rebuild, knowing what's left and the contracts are left. If you were told that you had to put together a contender and go for the cup, and you weren't able to do the rebuild, it gets very complicated. It gets very, very hard. So, I mean, there's something there. And now, speaking of trade, let's talk trade. Before we do, matrixhomefitness.ca. The players, by the way, in about a month, they're going to report for rookie camp. And then after that, it'll be the pro camp. And right now, they're probably on their Matrix home fitness equipment, whether it's elliptical or treadmill or bike. Bring it home. Discover a club quality workout in the comfort of your own home. I did. Visit matrixhomefitness.ca. I just wish I was in their shape. All right. Okay. Jake Allen. Jake Allen's name is really starting to come up, and it appears that, and it's not the first time that his name has been involved in trade rumors, because with such a very attractive salary of under $3 million, anyone would like to add Jake Allen to their team because he's good for at least 40 games per season. The Vegas Golden Knights made it known yesterday that Robin Lehner, I was going to say Max Pacioretty's out with an injury, and by the way, he is. He's going to have surgery to repair an Achilles tendon, but Max Pacioretty is now a Carolina Hurricane. But speaking of the Vegas Golden Knights, Robin Lehner, their goalie, is out. So now think about this. Marc-Andre Fleury is no longer a Vegas Golden Knight, and Robin Lehner is out long-term with an injury. So there's no doubt the Vegas Golden Knights, they need a goalie. So at that point, they're going to be interested in Jake Allen. Some people are probably saying, hey, Jake Allen, yeah, you know what? Make the trade. You sign Montembeault. Carey Price is going to be your number one, and Montembeault is going to be your number two. And acquire an asset or a prospect for Jake Allen, which, by the way, was something that Marc Bergevin did well because, you know, when someone's let go, no one wants to look back. And speaking of Marc, how about Trevor Timmins as well? I know they're not unanimous. I know they're not, but there's one thing that Bergevin did well was accumulating assets, asset management, acquiring a player, giving up a 4th round or a 5th round pick, and then holding on to that player for a year or two, and then end up trading that player for either a 4th round pick or 2 picks. I think they did that with Scandella, by the way, where they gave up a pick for him, and then they ended up getting 2 picks back for him, and they did that with a couple of players. Nate Thompson as well. I think they ended up winning in terms of asset management. They did that really well. And Joshua Roy and Jan Misak, no one's going to say this today, but those are Trevor Timmins draft picks, or under Trevor Timmins' watch. Doesn't mean they necessarily came from him, but ultimately he was the one who had final decision because he was the head of the department, even though they gave the title to Shane Sherla. It was Timmins who was the guy because, you know, they gave Timmins the title of assistant general manager, but he really was the guy who oversaw the amateur scouting and the entire department and stuff like that. So anyway, Bergevin did a good job with asset management for the most part in stockpiling picks, and it made Trevor Timmins have a lot of picks to choose from, and Misak and Roy were Trevor Timmins draft picks. Anyway, so now back to Jake Allen. So should the Canadians trade Jake Allen to the Vegas Golden Knights, and they're going to have Price and they're going to have Montembeault? Here's the deal. Even though you've heard or you read that there are one or two people that are close to the situation or close to Price saying that Price is doing great and he's going to be there in training camp and this and that, I'm not sold, because I can tell you that, even within the Montreal Canadiens, they're not sure that Carey Price is going to be there for camp. They're not sure that Carey Price is going to be there at the beginning of the season. And they're not sure if Carey Price is going to play. And if he is going to play, how many games he's going to play this season. They don't know. They really have to see what happens when he steps onto the ice and how his knee responds. So if you trade Allen and you don't have Price, then you have Montembeault. Do you bring in Caden Primo and make him continue his development here at the National Hockey League level? Or do you make Primo see a lot of ice at the American Hockey League level with the Laval Rocket? I would have Primo one more year with Laval. And if Carey Price doesn't play, I'm okay with Jake Allen and Montembeault. And if Price doesn't play, I'm okay if they trade Jake Allen and they try and acquire another goaltender. But at the same time, they don't want to get blown out either. And they don't want to lose all their games. Look, the Canadians are rebuilding, folks. Whether you like it or not, they're rebuilding. They're not going to tell you this, but they're okay if they don't ice the best team in the league and their best just isn't good enough and they end up losing more often than not. They're okay with that. What they're not okay with is losing 10 in a row or 12 in a row or 14 in a row or whatever it is, and giving up 50 shots a game and losing every game by 5 or 6 goals. At the end of the day, they are in the business to entertain and they are in the business to sell tickets. And if they're going to lose by that much, they're not going to be selling a lot of tickets. So they would need a Jake Allen in that respect and a Samuel Montembeault so that they're in games. Because it's going to be very hard to go out and get a player, another goalie, who's not making a lot of money. We know the Canadians are trying to shave money off the cap. Take a look at Allen's situation and the amount of money and the year left. It's a great situation for the Canadians to see what they'll do thereafter. So in the end, I don't think they're going to trade Jake Allen. Not just yet. I'm not sure that Carey Price is going to play. If he is going to play, I'm not so sure he's going to play a lot of them. I have my doubts. I really do. For what it's worth, I can tell you the Montreal Canadiens do as well. They're not certain that Carey Price is going to be back, and if he is going to be back, they're not certain when he's going to be back. So anyway, let's continue to keep an eye on junior hockey, because once again, we'll follow Czech center Jan Misak and Joshua Roy, who's out of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League and coming off such an amazing season with Le Phoenix de Sherbrooke Phoenix. And so far, it's pretty positive. But, I talk about rebuild. The Canadians talk about rebuild. Folks, have you seen Connor Bedard thus far at the World Juniors? I mean, is he something or is he something? With all due respect to Shane Wright, this is another level, folks. Connor Bedard, I'm ready to say it right now. And if I'm wrong, I'd put money on it. Connor Bedard is going to go number 1 in 2023. And I know that Graham McCagg says we shouldn't say that about 11 months before a draft or whatever it is, but I'm ready to say it. I'd put $1 or $2 on it. His wrist shot right now, there probably aren't 3 other players in the National Hockey in the world that have a better release than this guy. I mean, Austin Matthews has an incredible release. Alex Ovechkin has an incredible release. Patrick Laine has an incredible release. If Connor Bedard was in the National Hockey League right now, he'd be in that discussion of the top 5 releases in the entire National Hockey League. This guy can score goals. This guy can shoot the puck. And you know what? Yeah, there's doubts whether or not he's going to be a centerman at the National Hockey League level, especially if he doesn't grow a couple of inches. But even if this guy ends up playing wing, this guy's going to score 50 goals in the National Hockey League. I don't know how many seasons he's going to do it, but I'm willing to bet that at least once he's going to do it. This guy's an incredible goal scorer. So, some of you could say, Tony, what are the chances of the Canadiens getting the number 1 pick 2 years in a row? Probably the chances aren't great, but I'd put the chances on my side. And that's why I don't think Kent Hughes is going to add to this team. Are the Canadiens going to try to lose? No. But if he doesn't add to this team, and then once they get the trade deadline, he ends up trading a veteran or 2 or maybe 3, well, then organically, what has to happen is going to happen like it did last year. That the Canadiens just, at the end of the day, they just were not good enough. And that's why they lost more often than not. And that's why they put themselves in the best position to have the number 1 pick overall in the draft, which they ended up getting. And if you don't get it, I got to tell you, Michkov, Fantilli, Dvorsky, there are others. Folks, the 2023 draft is being compared to the 2003 draft. The 2003 draft, according to most, is the best draft in the history of the National Hockey League. The players that came out of that draft is absolutely unbelievable. Patrice Bergeron went 45th that year. Getzlaf was in that draft. Perry was in that draft. Carter was in that draft. The list goes on and on. It was an incredible draft. I want the Canadiens to be able to once again have a top 5 pick. How about even better, a top 3 pick? Or let's even dream the number 1 pick overall 2 years in a row for Connor Bedard. But if they draft top 3, they're going to end up getting a superstar. And I don't know about you, but I'll take as many superstars as I can get. And then Suzuki, Caulfield, Slafkovsky, and one of those top 3 picks in the draft, some of the young players on defense, some other players within the organization who are going to emerge. Now we're talking. Là, on commence à parler. I'm Marinaro. Tell your friends about the Sick Podcast on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. Follow us and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's absolutely free. Check it out. E mosituna.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. The Sick Podcast is brought to you by 8.6, Intense by Nature, and Lacage. If the last time you went to Lacage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you went back to Lacage. The menu will surprise you.